Well, that's an interesting story because I think it's completely different from the examples I've described so far because I didn't view Gay Girl in Damascus as a source. I viewed her as a person who was eventually working towards publishing a book, to be quite honest. It was someone telling these vivid, dramatic accounts of what life was like in Damascus. The only problem was it was all untrue. A lot of people and a lot of news organizations fell for it because the hoax was so well conducted. This online character, Amina Araf, had been around for over 5 years. So she had established presences on bulletin boards and email lists and across different social networks. So there were people who would vouch for her going back 5 years because they thought they actually knew this person. She was dating someone online, but they just dated via text. And she sent photos of a woman from Croatia, I believe, and claimed that to be her, and that fooled a lot of people. What exacerbated all this is at least 2 or 3 news organizations interviewed her via email or Skype text. No one talked to her in person, and no one talked to her via the phone or via video. And these stories actually got published. And so once she got that level of credibility, it gave other news organizations and just people in general a comfort level to assume that they actually existed, because, you know, why should I challenge that this person exists if the Guardian and the BBC and these other news organizations have done interviews with her, feature stories. The thing that brought suspicion to me was in the days around the time when she was supposedly kidnapped, I started getting both public and private messages from Syrians I know saying that they didn't think she existed. And I knew one person who was a member of the local gay and lesbian community in Syria, and they said they and none of their friends had heard of this person or none of them had met them in person. And other Syrians sent me messages that were very skeptical and essentially saying, when is this going to blow up in everyone's face? And so at that point, I just asked a very simple question on Twitter. Has anyone met her in person? And then if not, does anyone know anyone who's met her in person? And over a period of, I don't know, half a day or so, it became pretty clear that we couldn't find a single person that had met her in person. And then over the course of the week, it unraveled. You know, people were fairly sure within, in that first 24 hours that this was some level of a hoax. But it was until the very last minute, I worked under the assumption that there was always the possibility that there was a person deeply in the closet in Damascus who had covered their tracks so effectively that we can't find who they are now. And so the worst case scenario was that some poor woman was being detained or even tortured somewhere in Syria, and we had no way of finding who she was. But even though that was always in the corner of my mind, the more evidence we collected, the more it became clear that none of this made sense. And ultimately, a group of people ended up proving that this was actually some dude from Georgia living in Scotland who had perpetuated this hoax for over 5 years. And I think one reason he was able to get away with it was he was lucky that he created a character that was from Syria. And since there were no reporters in Syria, or very few reporters who had direct access to it, news organizations really had no choice but to try to talk to people remotely. So it was the perfect storm of circumstances and hoax planning that allowed this particular case to go as far as it did.